My name is Katie Spencer. My presentation is on Michel Foucault, the historian and philosopher who lived from 1926 to 1984. Michel Foucault was born in Poitiers, France, on October 15, 1926. He first gained notoriety in the 1960s when he held a series of lectures at French universities. In 1969, he was elected to the Collège de France. His new position was a very prestigious one. Foucault was a professor there until his death in 1984. He taught in the history of systems of thought. Foucault was very involved in politics. On numerous occasions, he protested for homosexuals' rights and for benefits for other marginalized groups of people. He also spoke out against the death penalty on numerous occasions. Foucault traveled to the United States to teach, and he planned to teach annually at the University of California at Berkeley before his death. Foucault died on June 25, 1984, after a struggle with AIDS. Though Foucault was known as a philosopher, he also studied psychology and history during his life. In addition, he was very interested in literature and politics. He wrote histories of the medical and social sciences. However, according to Gary Gutting in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, almost all of Foucault's works can be fruitfully read as philosophical in either or both of two ways: as a carrying out of philosophy's traditional critical project in a new historical manner, and as a critical engagement with the thought of traditional philosophers. In 1946, Foucault entered the École Normale Supérieure. While there, he was a student of Merleau-Ponty. This was during the time that existential phenomenology, Hegel, and Marx were popular for French philosophers to study. Foucault defined culture as a hierarchical organization of values, accessible to everybody, but at the same time the occasion of a mechanism of selection and exclusion. He was known for having a dislike for bourgeois culture. Gutting even wrote that he began from a relentless hatred of bourgeois society and culture and with a spontaneous sympathy for groups at the margins of the bourgeois, such as artists, homosexuals, and prisoners. Foucault found a mentor in Georges Canguilhem, a powerful figure at the French university. He sponsored Foucault's doctoral thesis, which looked at the history of madness. Canguilhem continued to influence and encourage Foucault throughout his life. Foucault's theories are often considered Kantian in nature. Gutting wrote that Kant developed a distinctively modern idea of philosophy as the critique of knowledge. Kant's great epistemological innovation was to maintain that the same critique that revealed the limits of our knowing powers could also reveal necessary conditions for their exercise. What might have seemed just contingent features of human cognition turn out to be necessary truths. Foucault, however, suggests the need to invert this Kantian move. Rather than asking what, in the apparently contingent, is actually necessary, he suggests asking what, in the apparently necessary, might be contingent. The focus of his questioning is the modern human sciences: biological, psychological, and social. Throughout his life, Foucault produced several major works, including The History of Madness in the Classical Age, The Birth of the Clinic, The Order of Things, The Archaeology of Knowledge, Discipline and Punish, The History of Sexuality, and The Use of Pleasure and the Care of the Self. The History of Madness in the Classical Age was published in 1961. It was a study of the emergence of mental illness in Europe. Foucault looks at the hypocrisy of modern psychiatry in this work. He argues that the mad were actually mentally ill, and that they needed treatment. The book looks at the history of the mentally ill from the Renaissance period to the modern era. The Birth of the Clinic was published in 1963. It serves as a critique of modern clinical medicine. The Order of Things was published in 1966. It is subtitled An Archaeology of the Human Sciences. Foucault is most famous for this piece. It is a global analysis of knowledge, and it discusses Kant's critique of classical representation. The Archaeology of Knowledge was published in 1969. It discusses the archaeological method used in the order of things. According to Gutting, the premise of the archaeological method is that systems of thought and knowledge are governed by rules, beyond those of grammar and logic, that operate beneath the consciousness of individual subjects and define a system of conceptual possibilities that determines the boundaries of thought in a given domain or period. However, Foucault is often criticized because the mere archaeological analysis could say nothing about the causes of the transition from one way of thinking to another. Genealogy, the new method first deployed in Discipline and Punish, was intended to remedy the deficiency. Discipline and Punish was published in 1975. It is a genealogical study of the changes of punishing criminals over time, from torturing and killing them to the modern way of gently imprisoning them. Foucault argues that imprisonment is a form of disciplinary control, and in this piece he discusses Bentham's panopticon as an ideal model of disciplinary power that could be used and applied in factories, hospitals, and even schools. The panopticon is the idea that there is a prison. In the center of a circle, there is a guard tower. The guard tower has a circular window going all the way around the tower. The outer circle contains cells where inmates are housed. In each cell, there is a window on the outside and the inside. The outside window allows for light, while the inside window allows the inmate to see the guard tower. The inmates can never see one another, and they can never tell whether the jailer can see them. The idea is that the jailer can always see them, though they may not actually always see them. It is the idea that the inmates can always be watched. Foucault's next piece, The History of Sexuality, was first published in 1976. There was a second volume, The Confessions of the Flesh, but it was never published. In this piece, Foucault argues that the modern view treats sex like a crime, and that individuals internalize the norms laid down by the sciences of sexuality and monitor themselves in an effort to conform to these norms. People self-scrutinize, or in other words, they become their own jailer. In 1984, Foucault published two pieces, The Use of Pleasure and The Care of the Self. In these two works, he compares ancient pagan beliefs about sexuality to Christian beliefs about sexuality. While Christianity greatly restricts or even forbade sexual activity, the ancient Greeks exercised moderation, but most forms of sexuality were considered acceptable. Foucault did not want any of his works published after his death. One thing that he was often criticized for was writing academic works that dealt with his own personal problems. In other words, he regularly made the issues that most troubled him personally, emotional suffering, exclusion, and sexuality, the topics of his research. However, Foucault left a great impact on our society, and he is still studied today in philosophy, sociology, psychology, and history classes. For information on the sources used for this presentation, please see my works cited